WAFLS standing for Western Ozypholamus Landscape Study. I wanted to give you a brief, I'll try to move through this as quickly as possible, but a brief overview of our 2016 program results. And if you have further questions or comments, please feel free to add those into the comments section on the Facebook group. I'd be happy to respond in more detail to any of those questions. So I want to acknowledge my co-author Neil Paprocki from Hawkwatch International. He's been an excellent partner in the expansion of this program from Idaho into Utah and has been involved with it from the beginning, and I just can't give him enough compliments and thanks for the collaboration. So I want to talk about some of the first major developments of 2016 on the WAFLS program. We successfully expanded from Idaho into Utah and completed the survey across 2 western states. That is a huge success for the size of the program, as you'll find out. We have a new name, Project WAFLS, that I've introduced here, Western Ozypholamus Landscape Study. Who doesn't like waffles? So you'll see a lot more of that going forward. And we've done multiple presentations. Both Neil and I presented at the Raptor Research Conference in New Jersey as part of a short-eared owl symposium. Neil did the overall results of Idaho and Utah, and I looked at some more forward-looking analysis that we're considering of integrating other data sources into the results of our surveys. And then both Neil and I have presented at various chapters of the Wildlife Society, including Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming. And earlier in December, I completed the keynote address at the Wyoming Citizen Science Conference, which was definitely fun and an opportunity to highlight all of this work and all of your contributions. So the study objectives, you might note that these are a little bit longer and a little crisper than what we had before. We've spent some time formulating that, especially as we've looked for external funding. Just to kind of hit these briefly, to quantify the number of short-eared owls in each state, quantify how the populations within each state fluctuate through space and time. We know that this species has a fluctuating breeding density. What we're trying to do is understand the underlying pattern below that density so that we can use that information to put projections into the future. Look at the distribution and habitat use, and especially climate influences on short-eared owls in the West. Do all of this in a statistically rigorous framework that is defensible both from a scientific and management perspective, and then really deliver these results into high-value conservation actions. And we're generating a growing list of projects and teams that the results of this project will help influence. For example, a couple of those may include things like helping to prioritize where fire restoration occurs to benefit not only greater sage grouse but short-eared owls, to things like delayed grazing in certain areas where short-eared owls may be nesting in high densities. So those are just 2 examples of multiple conservation actions that we think we can influence directly with the results of this program. So many of you know the spatial distribution of this program. So the light blue here indicates the stratum. We define that as the area where we expect 95% or more of the short-eared owls to exist across these 2 states. And then the black areas are the places that you all as our volunteers went out and surveyed. The 2016 results, there were 204 volunteers participated. Thank you very much, all of you. You contributed over 2,600 hours and traveled over 36,000 miles. Using our formulas for volunteer value, that comes up at more than $81,000 contribution that you all made to this program. I'm just at awe every time I see these numbers. If you had asked me a couple years ago if this would be successful on this scale, I would have said no. So thank you, and thank you for your contribution to the program. It makes the program as a whole. Surveys. We completed, we detected short-eared owls on 20 of the 98 grids, 14 of the 50 grids in Idaho, and 6 of the 48 grids in Utah. So looking at the survey results, this is a statistical analysis looking at habitat associations and such. There's 3 levels to this picture. We call it a multi-scale occupancy model. At the bottom level would be the probability of detection that we're looking at here. The level above that is the probability that the bird is at a given point, given that it's somewhere on the transect. And then the highest level is the probability that there is a bird on the transect. So the probability of detection, we see that it is more difficult to detect them in windy conditions, which most of you would probably agree. But it was more difficult to detect them the closest we got to civil twilight. And this is one that has had mixed results in the past on surveys. It gets harder to see them and detect them as you get closer to darkness, but we also expect them to be more active, and as a result, probability of detection to be somewhat higher there. But our results suggest that they're easier to detect an hour to 2 hours before sunset. Moving up a level, this is the probability that they would be at a given point. And we see a strong association of them with stubble agriculture. So this is unplowed old agriculture. It has a much more complex structure to it. We tend to think of higher prey density in stubble agriculture, which is one of the reasons it was in the category. So this comes as no surprise, but our results support it strongly. And a very negative association with bare dirt agriculture, so recently plowed, and that also is as expected. If you plow a field, you're not likely to find mice and voles running out there in the wide open. They like cover, they like refugia. The owls like to also nest in areas with cover, so that is not a surprise either. So moving up to the highest level, so what's the largest factor that would influence short-eared owls to be somewhere along the transect? And we see a strong association with sagebrush in the Intermountain West. That makes sense. These are typically referred to as grassland species. That's because they were originally studied in the Midwest, where you have very complex prairie structure. But in the Intermountain West, we've always thought they were associated with sagebrush, and our results show that strongly. And a negative association with grassland. So since most of our grasslands are invasive cheatgrass that are very simple, low, short, add very little habitat structure for a short-eared owl, this too comes as no surprise. So that gets to the actual numbers, and I'm presenting the 2015 Idaho numbers here and the 16 Idaho-Utah numbers. And we see the first estimates for statistically rigorous estimates for Utah there, looking at around 1,200 breeding owls within the state, and then Idaho up around 2,150, I think. And that's a 16% drop from the previous year. And so part of our action will be looking at that going forward. We expect the populations to fluctuate year to year, and a 16% drop is well within what we would look at for this species. However, is that drop part of the normal fluctuation of predator-prey cycles? Is it the result that our model in 2016 was a better fit than our 15 model, so we would expect the estimate to be more accurate? That could be the result. Or is this part of the long-term trend that we are very concerned with that really kicked off this program to begin with? And all I can say at this point is time will tell on that, and that's why we have to take the long view of this picture. I have done some some analysis of other data sources that are less focused on short-eared owls, and that's part of what I presented at the Raptor Research Conference. And it shows that in the northern plains states, between 15 and 16, they also may have seen a population decrease. So that doesn't answer what's causing it, but it answers that there may indeed have been a region-wide, if not continent-wide, decrease in population between 15 and 16. So we have a lot more work to do, and you all are an excellent part of that. So in conclusion, we had the first multi-state survey of short-eared owls. We have initial population estimates, rigorous estimates for both states. We've identified the habitat associations, but they may vary regionally. And once again, the overall project design and quality exceeded our expectations. I now want to use a few minutes to talk about some of the future directions and other areas of concern that we have. Things like roadway mortality, rodenticides, and then how do we expand this program beyond Idaho and Utah. This is just an example. These are 42 dead owl locations that one of our volunteers, or a couple of our volunteers, Don and Sherry in Idaho, went out, GPS collected, photographed, and have delivered to us, showing that there's really a owl mortality hotspot for short-eared owls, especially over in the Mud Lake area. We don't see them dying on the interstate. Long-term Boise State barn owl study along the interstate finds thousands of dead barn owls, but only 1 or 2 in many years of surveying short-eared owls along the interstate. So they avoid the interstate, but are highly susceptible here in the Mud Lake area. And we are aware of other hotspots in Utah and in Wyoming, and we're currently putting together a program to analyze the habitat and try to come up with mitigating factors to address this issue. Rodenticides are a big concern for all raptors across the West and beyond, around the world, I guess. And so when we have found fresh carcasses, we've done some preliminary testing. This is a very expensive process, but we've been able to get a couple of them done so far, and we found that of the first 2 carcasses tested, the cause of the roadway mortality, it wasn't West Nile virus, it wasn't avian influenza on either carcass. One of the carcasses wasn't quite in good enough condition, but the other one had no elevated levels of contaminants. So rodenticide was not an issue, at least in that one owl's death. Like I say, we're going to be testing a few more from different areas as we go forward. And we would appreciate being made aware of any other roadway mortality, especially of short-eared owls, that you all may come across. So stay tuned for that one. And then lastly, the WAFLS Expansion. We have big plans for 2017. We'll be expanding into western Wyoming with the excellent partners of the Teton Raptor Center. We'll be coordinating the volunteers in Wyoming. And then Wyoming Game and Fish have participated and supported this expansion. And I should note that the map here doesn't show it, but the Nevada Department of Wildlife has also agreed to do a number of surveys in the northern Nevada area to really fill in that corner between Idaho and Utah. And so once we figure out where they're going to be doing their work, we'll get that integrated. But all of this expansion helps the overall quality of our results, the overall impact of our results, and it makes the estimates within each state more accurate. And there's a whole lot of statistical math behind why that is. But just to give you an example, when we expanded from Idaho into Utah, we dropped from 70 grids in Idaho down to 50 and added 50 in Utah, and the Idaho estimates became more accurate and with higher confidence. So the larger that we can expand this program, the more higher quality data we'll have within each state, and then also we'll have a better view into the especially the spatial distribution of owls and how that fluctuates over time. So in closing, it's a tremendous program. I'm excited to be a part of it, and I'm excited that we're going to be moving on it going into the future and expanding it to other states. And I just want to come back and say thank you very much to all the over 200 of you citizen scientist volunteers who helped make this all possible and contributed photos and roadway mortality issues. You've gone above and beyond just completing the surveys, and we appreciate that, and I never take that for granted. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions about what I presented here or questions on the program in general, please post those comments into the Facebook group, and I'd be happy to answer those, or you can email either Neil or I directly. So Thank you very much, and have a great day.